First, I know I spent a lot of time talking about the various ways in which men are unjustly vilified within society, and a lot of that is being done at the hands of certain contingencies of women. But please, do not for a second think that what should be taken away from this video is that men should now direct their justifiable anger at women in response. That would be to completely miss the point of this video, which is to hopefully stop this cycle of hatred from swinging from one end of the extreme to the other. Alright, so as the title suggests, I think that there's a pretty blatant anti-male bias on the internet. And the pervasiveness of this bias is so broad and expansive that I'm going to have to split the discussion of this issue into two videos. In the first part, I'm essentially just going to present my evidence, which consists of the various cases of anti-male bias, unreasonable double standards, and blatant misandry that have become rampant on the internet. In the second part, I'm going to address what I actually think is the bigger problem, which is that this bias is not only being overlooked, but actually defended, justified, and promoted by people and institutions at the most influential levels of society. And so I'm going to, in good faith, take a look at their arguments in defense of this wholesale enmity towards men and discuss where I think their claims actually have some merit and where I think their arguments fall short of their own logic. But again, that's going to be in part 2 of this deep dive. In this video, as I said, I'm just going to present the evidence that I've compiled over the past few months that supports the claim that this anti-male bias not only exists, but is actually becoming more and more prevalent on the internet. So if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I'm not on most social media platforms. I don't have Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Snapchat, or any of the other mainstream social media applications. I mostly stick to Reddit and YouTube. Although, side note, this will probably change in the near future, as not being able to access these platforms without an account has made doing research for these videos unnecessarily tedious. In any case, due to my self-imposed exile from these apps, I initially wasn't aware of the rampant misandry that was taking place on them, and my initial exposure to this phenomenon mostly came from Reddit. On the Am I the A-hole subreddit, or AITA for short, users post personal accounts of conflicts and altercations that they've experienced and ask the internet whether they were right or wrong in their handling of the situation. Despite Reddit having a reputation for being a male-dominated space top to bottom, a recent survey found that 63% of AITA subscribers identify as female. And the unfortunate reality is that this gender disparity has likely had a direct effect on the way that users interpret these accounts. Essentially, since this is a female-dominated space, women are often given the benefit of the doubt, whereas men are often condemned outrightly. And this has resulted in an environment that has become increasingly defined by the double standards that it perpetuates. In 2022, a user on the Data is Beautiful subreddit compiled the verdicts given on the AITA subreddit and graphed the results by age and sex to reveal that men are judged to be the offenders at a much higher rate than women. Now, although alarming, this data isn't necessarily conclusive. It could just be that men, on average, post less ambiguous stories of themselves where they are objectively in the wrong while seemingly not comprehending how or why they were at fault. This, of course, could be a possibility, but as we look closer at the specific stories being posted, we start to see that this isn't necessarily the case, and that men are indeed judged much more harshly than women. On several occasions, users have tried to expose this double standard by posting old stories but with the genders reversed to see if the responses from the community would remain consistent. And as you can probably imagine, in most cases, if not every case, the responses changed depending on whether the perspective was coming from a man or a woman. So for example, in this story, a man invited a woman over to his apartment so that he could cook dinner for her. After dinner, he asked her to do all of the dishes since he had done all of the cooking. While she did the dishes, he went into the other room and watched TV. She was understandably upset about this situation, and so she left after doing the dishes and posted the story, asking if she was wrong to leave the date early. For context, they had been dating for 2 months. And unsurprisingly, the consensus was that no, she was not wrong for feeling upset and leaving the date early. Not the jerk. At the level of relationship you described, it was not appropriate for him to ask you to do the dishes. Not the jerk. That's what couples who live together do. You were a guest. Not the jerk. You two haven't been dating long enough for that sort of thing. He should have treated you like a guest rather than someone he'd been with for years. Bad move on his part. And just for clarity, I actually 100% agree with this verdict. I know that we all come from different cultures and backgrounds, so maybe this guy came came from an environment where this was considered to be a completely normal expectation to have of your romantic partner this early into your relationship, but I, and seemingly most of the commenters here, come from an environment where that is simply not the case. Personally, if I invite you over, you are a guest, which means that you are not lifting a finger while you are in my home. I don't care if we've been dating for 1 month or 10 years. Those are just the rules. And it goes both ways. I would find it very off-putting if someone invited me over for a meal with the expectation that I clean up after them while they go into the next room, watch TV, and essentially just wait for me to finish. And so again, I agree with this consensus. And at least for me, it doesn't matter whether this expectation for the guest to clean up after the host comes from a man or a woman. I personally find this to be an extremely inappropriate request to make. Unfortunately, however, this subreddit doesn't seem to share this egalitarian sentiment, as a few days later, another user posted this exact same story but with the genders reversed. This time it was the girlfriend who cooked the meal, and the boyfriend was expected to clean up after her while she went into the next room and watched TV. And of course, as you could probably guess, the responses were very different. You're the jerk. 30 minutes of washing up is a lot for 2 people, so either this has been exaggerated or you don't know how to wash dishes. Also, you guys may not be super serious, but if anyone has gone to the effort of cooking you dinner, the least you can do is clean up. You're the jerk. You're not a guest, you're her boyfriend. Maybe her request would be odd on a first date, but it seems totally reasonable to ask her boyfriend of 2 months to clean up after she cooked. You're the jerk for being salty about being asked to do dishes, especially after your partner cooked, and for the fact that you even needed to ask if you're the jerk. And so, as we can see, there is a clear double standard at play here. For exhibiting the exact same behavior in the exact same situation, a man will be seen as a villain, whereas a woman will be seen as a victim. And this example was particularly interesting because it perfectly illustrated how most of us don't actually argue from a place of objectivity and principle, even though we think we do. When the perspective came from a woman, we confidently declared that 2 months is an inadequate amount of time passed for a man to carry the expectation that his girlfriend should do all of the cleaning if he does all of the cooking, and that she should still be looked at as a guest during this period. But when the perspective came from a man, all of a sudden 2 months is a completely appropriate amount of time for the woman to hold that exact same expectation of him, and he should absolutely no longer be looked at as a guest during this period. And this perfectly demonstrates why arguing principles is so important, because when we ignore the principles of an argument and only focus on the context, then more often than not we will expose ourselves as hypocrites. Because if your principle changes every time that the context changes, as we saw in this example, then you unintentionally reveal that you actually have no principles, and that your arguments are purely subjective and based almost entirely off of your own biases. In any case, this is far from the only example of this phenomenon, where users repost old stories with the genders reversed so as to put this hypocrisy on full display. In another story, a man stopped cooking dinner for his partner after she inexplicably stopped holding up her end of the household chores, as per their agreement. The unanimous decision was that he was entirely in the wrong. You're the jerk and you know it. Communicate like an adult, use your words, and explain what you are doing and why. This time, the OP actually tried to defend himself, writing, "Every time I try to bring up chores with her, she snaps at me and says she will do them but never follows through. I have tried communicating how frustrating this is for me, but she doesn't listen." But of course, for the commenters, his justifications didn't matter. The verdict was in. Use your grown-up words and manners. Passive-aggressive much? As you said yourself, I didn't give her any warning. 100% the jerk. Learn to communicate better. You have a legitimate concern, but you just lost your high ground by being a complete idiot. She starts cutting back on household chores that she had been doing for years without fail, and your first thought is punishment, not concern for why? Total jerk move. Having been together for so long, your communication skills should be much better. And so naturally, another user posted this exact same story with the genders reversed, so that this time it was the woman who had stopped cooking for the man. And of course, the responses were very different. Nope, no one gets to scream at me because I didn't make supper. Not the jerk. Not the jerk. Did he have a discussion with you before he stopped cleaning the shower or doing the dishes? Nope. The boyfriend seems really emotional. Total overreaction and temper tantrum for OP standing up for herself. So now that the roles are reversed, the woman isn't subjected to allegations of poor communication skills, her behavior isn't seen as being passive-aggressive, and there is no concern for the sudden change in the boyfriend's behavior, as we saw in the comments of the original story. Nope. This time she is completely justified in her actions, and the man is still in the wrong. But we don't even have to run these contrived social experiments to see the double standards at play. Even in situations where a man is deemed to be innocent, the behavior of the woman who wronged him is still minimized minimized and ultimately excused. Here, a man asked his wife not to gossip to her friends about his body, as it is something that he is very insecure about. She of course promised him that she wouldn't. But on a night out with her and her friends, one of them referred to him directly by referencing the specific body part that he was insecure about. Obviously, he was upset and he ended up leaving the night early. And while his wife was initially apologetic, she later told him that he was overreacting and that it was completely normal for her to discuss these things with her friends. The top comment on this post reiterated that although he's not in the wrong here, this type of talk is normal between women and is acceptable because, quote, they're not doing it to hurt you. Apparently, the real foul was the friend diminishing him by addressing him by his body part, and somehow not the fact that his wife embarrassed him by breaking her promise to him and then blamed him for getting upset. But as another much less upvoted comment pointed out, what gets me is that all these commenters are excusing the women doing it by saying stuff like, oh, it's inevitable, and oh, women do it because they like gossiping. When you switch it to locker room talk done in male circles though, all of society gives you an unambiguous no, providing references to articles that unanimously conclude that this type of talk is completely unacceptable for men. It doesn't matter if men aren't doing it to hurt women, and it certainly doesn't matter whether it's considered to be normal or not, which, by the way, several men in the comments argued that these types of conversations amongst men are in fact not normal. In any case, the verdict is that men absolutely should not be speaking about women in this manner. But of course, now that women are doing it, all of a sudden this type of talk is completely acceptable. This example demonstrates how even when men are the victims in an altercation, the woman is still given the benefit of the doubt and her actions are largely excused. And just to be clear, I don't inherently have a problem with this mentality. I generally believe that as a collective, we are too quick to condemn people, and we don't always try to consider the reasons why a person might have acted inappropriately. Again, if you've watched any of my videos, then you know that I obsess over the concept of truth and empathy, meaning that we should of course observe the objective realities of a situation and condemn the actions of the person who is responsible for inflicting harm. But to empathize means to understand completely, and I wholeheartedly advocate for the extension of that empathy to everyone, even to those who we consider to be the offenders in a particular case. As I've stated before, empathy does not mean that we excuse, condone, or justify the behavior, only that we earnestly seek to understand it. And so again, I don't inherently have a problem with looking beyond a person's actions and giving them the benefit of the doubt. However, when this principle is used to minimize harm, delegitimize a person's experience, and show favoritism to one group of people over another, then this can no longer be considered as true and genuine empathy. At that point, this willingness to give the benefit of the doubt to the offender isn't empathy, it's just bias. Over on the r/text subreddit, a man posted a string of erratic messages he received from his girlfriend after they had apparently just enjoyed a pleasant night out. The general response from the community, though, was that he must have done something to provoke his girlfriend into sending these messages, and that even though there is no apparent reason to not believe his story, he still must be lying. First gut instinct at saying this is that there's no way this was out of the blue. OP clearly forgot something important or neglected something prior to this. She feels this way and is expressing it for a reason. He doesn't mention anything about what he does. He just makes her out to be dumb for being mad after posting something that indicated otherwise. This guy sucks, LMAO. And so again, we see the woman being given the benefit of the doubt, which again, I don't inherently have a problem with, especially in these scenarios where we don't have the full context. It's very possible that these commenters are 100% right and that this man is a neglectful partner. But when this mentality causes us to, again, minimize harm and delegitimize experiences in favor of showing support to one group of people over another, then there is a problem. Because objectively speaking, at the very least, the girlfriend's messages contain some emotionally manipulative language. Psychologists have long since concluded that phrases like, if you loved me, you would, are at best accusatory and at worst manipulative. And so clearly, our bias has caused us to overlook this transgression, or in other words, to minimize harm. Additionally, after all of the accusations that the OP was a neglectful partner, he tried to clarify that they had only been dating for 2 months and that they weren't together for her birthday, so there's nothing he could have done. But again, his justifications didn't matter. The verdict was in. So OP's the D-bag a-hole, and he's trying to make her look like a bad guy to make himself seem like he's worth more than a rundown, moldy studio apartment with the roof half missing. And so as we can clearly see, our bias has now caused us to delegitimize this experience. Because given the information available to us, there is no legitimate reason to not believe this man's story. The only basis for taking one side over the other here is the misguided belief that a woman would never behave like this unless a man first provoked her. And so just to recap, this willingness to give the benefit of the doubt has caused us to minimize the objective harm of the emotionally manipulative language that was used against this man, delegitimize his story and experience, and favor one group, the woman, over the other, the man, with no legitimate basis as to why, signifying that this is not empathy that we're displaying. It's bias. And while I don't believe that any of us can really say for sure who was at fault here without more context, it was still very interesting to witness the comments immediately disregard this man's claims and take the girlfriend's side, despite the complete lack of evidence. And this isn't the only type of context where we see this particular mentality play out, the man being blamed for his partner's behavior. This unhealthy reflex to instinctively give the benefit of the doubt to any woman in any contentious situation with a man has resulted in some egregious mainstream idiosyncrasies. For example, there is a popular notion that if a woman cheats on her partner, it is because he failed her in some way, shape, or form, and that this betrayal on her part is actually an indictment of his behavior, not hers.
If a woman cheats on you, it's your fault. Women don't cheat. You should have been a better man to her.
I've seen so many more women cheat. And being a woman myself, I get to be an insider to the things that women talk about. And yes, they will admit to one another that they cheat, but you will never hear an ounce of remorse. They always victimize themselves. What they'll say is, instead of saying, you know what, I cheated, it was wrong, it was dishonest of me, it was betrayal, and I'll never do it again, what you will hear is, well, I cheated because I had to. He wasn't giving me what I needed and what I deserved as a woman. And all the other women will, jump right in and, be victims and victimize her, saying, oh, you poor thing. He should have treated you better. You take care of his kids and you do this and you do that. And he should have appreciated you more and you wouldn't have had to go screw another man. But it's really quite scary how they do that. But
these videos demonstrate a biased cultural tendency to not only minimize the harmful actions of certain women, but to also blame men for the behavior of their partners, as if to suggest that it is inconceivable that a woman would ever do something wrong without herself being wronged first, which I would argue is a result of psychological processes like the halo effect, or what we now commonly refer to as pretty privilege, as well as certain movements like Me Too and Time's Up promoting hashtags like Believe All Women, which explicitly aim to delegitimize and deter any scrutiny of female behavior. But before I get sidetracked, that is a separate video entirely. In any case, we see this benefit of the doubt bias play out in the mainstream too. A few months ago, the divorce proceedings between Sophie Turner and Joe Jonas became headline news when a source close to the couple claimed that the reason that they were separating was due to a, quote, difference in lifestyles. Apparently, she likes to party while he likes to stay at home.
Ricky said TMZ saying that while Joe is seeking joint custody, the couple's 2 children are residing with him right now and they have been for a while. And reportedly, as far as why Joe filed for divorce, one source reportedly told them, she likes to party, he likes to stay at home. They have very different lifestyles. And so with that and a number of the reports, you have a lot of people slamming this media narrative, with many thinking this is a blatant PR attempt to disparage Sophie and make her look like the bad parent amid the divorce, with people calling this an attempt to, quote, transparently throw your wife under the bus and start a misogynistic hate campaign against her once you start divorce proceedings. Others saying in the PR campaign, painting Sophie as a bad mom who loves to go out and drink while her virtuous husband stays home to watch the kids commences. And I think I'm supposed to gather from all the carefully placed headlines that she's a partier and thus a bad mom, while he is the hero dad making sacrifices. But no one seems to question why he, at 30, decided to marry a 23-year-old and thought she'd suddenly turn into a trad wife. Right in there, we saw a lot of people bring up their age. He was 29, she was 23 when they got married. When they started dating, he was 27, she was 20. And so you have people saying things like trying to paint her as a bad mother while he drinks on stage and parties himself. You're the one who married a girl in her early 20s as a 30-year-old. Like, what the f***? She gave up her life in the UK to live with him and start a family, and now he's trying to ruin her rep. Not on my watch.
Now, I'll admit that I'm not particularly well informed when it comes to celebrity news, nor do I typically follow stories like this. So to be fair to all the people who were speculating on this story, it is entirely possible that they were right and that Joe Jonas's PR team was putting out a narrative that was designed to paint Sophie Turner as a bad parent because it would help him in the custody battle for his children. Without any further information to go on, this is undoubtedly a possibility. But the fact remains that at the time of this reporting and at the time of all of this speculation, there was absolutely no evidence to suggest that this was the reality of the situation. This story was broken by TMZ, a notorious gossip tabloid that frequently publishes inflammatory headlines with the explicit purpose of stirring up controversy. This is not a publication that one goes to for accurate, hard-hitting journalism. I mean, at the time, it wasn't even confirmed that the source was a part of Jonas's PR team. But of course, none of this mattered. It didn't even matter that the couple had put out a joint statement to combat the speculation around this narrative.
Notably, while everyone else is fighting online, Joe and Sophie put out a statement seemingly trying to combat some of the backlash, with them both writing, or at the very least posting on Instagram, that this divorce is mutual, and adding there are many speculative narratives as to why, but truly, this is a united decision, and we sincerely hope that everyone can respect our wishes for privacy for us and our children.
Unlike the example from the Artex subreddit, this wasn't even a case of he said, she said. This was a case where both the woman and the man involved in the situation came out and explicitly said, this is not true. But again, none of this mattered. The benefit of the doubt bias was in full effect, and the internet had decided that Joe Jonas was a misogynist, even though there was no actual evidence of misogyny to back up this claim. Soon, posts started popping up on social media praising the fans' quote, outright support for Sophie Turner. And needless to say, the unfortunate reality is that this outright support is the problem. Our support should always be contingent upon the truth. It shouldn't matter if you are black, white, male, female, gay, straight, or anything in between. If you are telling the truth, then you should have the support of the general public against anyone and everyone who would seek to silence or denounce you. And the fact that in a situation where at the time there was no objective truth, only speculation and questionable reporting from a notoriously dubious source, the woman in the situation was shown outright support, while the man was immediately condemned and labeled a misogynist, and was also accused of just general creepiness out of nowhere, demonstrates that men in general are immediately assumed to be the villain in any given scenario. And when this is the prevailing attitude towards men, that they are the villains, then what inherently starts to happen is that certain actions and behaviors that we as a society know to be wrong start to become completely acceptable, as long as they're being perpetuated against men. Recently, Chelsea Handler hosted the Critics' Choice Awards, where she made this comment about actor Barry Keoghan's body.
Most male actors use prosthetics, so thank you, Barry, for keeping it real, and please thank your for its service.
Okay, so the reason that people often revert to the commonly used "if a man did this" argument is because what they're arguing is the principle of the situation. What they're saying is that if an action is wrong, then it is wrong regardless of who commits the act, whether it was done by a man or a woman. Murder doesn't all of a sudden become legal just because it was committed by a woman instead of a man, although some recent cases seem to suggest that this may actually be the direction that our justice system is going in. In any case, the reason that people revert to this argument is because this is the foundation that every social movement was built upon. Previously marginalized groups were arguing that racism, sexism, and sexuality-based discrimination are wrong, regardless of the identity of the group that is being affected by these exclusionary ideologies. It wasn't only wrong in the specific context that it was happening to those groups. They argued that this discriminatory mindset was wrong in a human rights sense. These were just the communities at the time who were being victimized by this general injustice. And the same can be said of modern social movements concerning issues of free speech, bodily autonomy, and in this case, sexual objectification. Essentially, if it would be wrong for a man to objectify a woman in a public setting by thanking one of her body parts for its service, then it should also be wrong for a woman to do the same by publicly referencing a man's genitalia in front of a room of his peers on national television. But honestly, we don't even need to make the "if a man did this" argument in this situation. All we need to do is look at the actor's reaction. He was obviously not comfortable with her making remarks about his body at all. And frankly, that should be enough. So with a transgression of this magnitude being carried out at one of the most important events in Hollywood and being broadcast nationally, naturally you would assume that there was a significant amount of backlash to Handler's remarks. No? Well, that's where you'd be wrong. In fact, there doesn't seem to be a single mainstream article written about the discomfort that she had caused him with her comments. And the reason for this is again because of this prevailing attitude towards men that paints them as villains. Public sexual objectification is a horrible thing and must be denounced, except in cases where a man is being publicly objectified. And of course, this general attitude towards men is extremely prominent on social media. Now, as I already mentioned, I'm not actually on most social media platforms, but my activity on Reddit and YouTube has exposed me to various content creators who have been documenting the multitude of ways in which this general bias against men has been manifesting online. One such content creator goes by the name of The Dadvocate, and I'm gonna let her do most of the heavy lifting on this section, because her videos perfectly exemplify how certain behaviors that we know to be wrong become completely acceptable once they're being perpetrated against men.
I am thinking about this. Why do short guys always have like something else about their appearance that just like makes up for their shortness, or at least they think it does? Like, if they're short, they're also buff. Or if they're short, they also have a mustache. Like, there's always a second thing that goes with these short guys. Obviously not all of them, but like quite a lot of them. Name other things that they would do to balance that they are short.
So not only do you think short men need to offset being short with some other quality, you can't think of any positive character traits they could use to do this? Maybe integrity, honesty, kindness, maybe? No, just the only way you value men is through their physical appearance?
Okay, so according to the definition, this is body shaming through and through. Now, body shaming is a concept that is usually invoked during discussions around weight, which in the majority of cases is a quality that is 100% within a person's control. So technically, by that metric, it should be considered significantly worse to shame somebody for a quality that is completely out of their control, like their height. However, this particular type of body shaming has become extremely popular amongst women and some men, to the point where it is no longer really considered to be body shaming, despite the measurably harmful effects that it is having on the collective male psyche.
He's a 10, but he's short.
Oh boy.
7.
He's like a 6.
He's a 6.
I'm gonna go with a 5. 3.
You give an ugly guy a chance, he thinks he rules the world. I swear to God. Listen, I'm not shaming people for their looks, but I am though.
And this only reinforces the reality that these publicly condemned behaviors are completely overlooked when it is men who are being victimized by them, leading many to the conclusion that these public movements for acceptance and equality in general aren't actually for men, even when they fit the criteria for exclusion. It has long been argued that the entire body positive movement is exclusively for women and not for men. Headlines clearly demonstrate this exclusion by referring to women as plus size while still referring to men as overweight, or by suggesting that larger women shouldn't have to settle for larger men, because at the end of the day, being plus size is only attractive if you're a woman. If you're a man, you need to get in shape. And this isn't the only context where certain behaviors are celebrated when exhibited by women, but condemned when exhibited by men. There's been a lot of discussion recently about the topic of weaponized incompetence, which essentially occurs whenever a person feigns ignorance about a topic, or more specifically, a chore, in order to get out of doing something that they don't want to do.
So first of all, I'm well aware that this is a joke. There are a lot of jokes like this. Y'all are all sending me this video where the wife asked her husband to clean up around the house, but instead he starts tightening the bedpost, which she intended to be funny, but we all know what happened to that post. Yet, these are the comments we're seeing on this woman's post. I just get the drill and start hitting buttons until he comes running, purposely misusing the level to get him to hang pictures. Ma'am, you're giving away our secret tactics. I didn't know this was universal. But no one's accusing these women of weaponized incompetence. Yet, this is literally the definition. This is literally the definition of weaponized incompetence. So is it only men capable of weaponized incompetence, or are we all ready to finally chill out about this?
Even behaviors as seemingly innocuous as men adopting women's mannerisms and communication styles within the context of a relationship is seen as something to be admonished.
POV, dating during the sassy mandemic of 2023.
Why can't you start any conversation? Like, do you even want me? Like, what do you...
Let's review the comments. Them now unfollowing too, like that's for the girls to do. I woke up this morning and was blocked, like, he said this emoji during an argument. I texted him, what you doing? And he said, wouldn't you like to know? Nah. When he uses the eye roll emoji. Agwek says, when a man actually wants a mutual relationship. I'm pretty sure this is just a dude being facetious to see if the girlies would agree with him, and they did. So what I'm getting out of this are two conclusions. One, that men are starting to act the way women have been acting, and that two, y'all don't like it. It's almost like no one likes being treated like Having respect for yourself is not just for the girls. So if setting boundaries and not tolerating disrespect is a sassy mandemic, then mask up, because it's not going away in 2 years.
And so, in totality, the combination of these double standards, the benefit of the doubt bias, the general vilification of men, and the hypocrisy of these social movements that reinforce the very discrimination that they fight against on men, has resulted in a social environment that is rife with outright misandry.
Say what you want about women who hate men,
I will.
But there is no partner more loyal to a man than a man-hating woman. If she chose you, you are the exception to her, and she is not about to go sort through the trash to find your replacement because she does not believe he exists. Unfortunately, ladies, the same does not apply to us. Men who hate women just become mess.
Oh, that's a cute hashtag. Ladies actually believe that your man is going to go completely unaffected by your hatred of men? And you honestly believe that hating men makes a woman more loyal? When I say men, I don't mean you. And you actually think that makes him feel better. Like, no, dude, humble yourself and recognize that if you want to be intellectually consistent, you have to admit that you either hate all men, including your own, or you have to admit that there are good men.
Now, I know that this is abrupt, but this is actually where I'm going to end this video. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, it is one thing to perpetuate misandry, or racism, or sexism, or homophobia, or any other discriminatory ideology. But it is another thing entirely to justify, defend, and condone it, as this user did in their video. And of course, there are an alarming number of social media users who defend misandry. But what is actually more troubling is that there are also scholars, educators, journalists, and entire news organizations who not only defend this outright hatred towards men, but explicitly promote it. And that is what I'm going to discuss in the next video. So stay tuned for that. But before I end this video, I want to make a few things clear. First, I know I spent a lot of time talking about the various ways in which men are unjustly vilified within society. And a lot of that is being done at the hands of certain contingencies of women. But please, do not for a second think that what should be taken away from this video is that men should now direct their justifiable anger at women in response. That would be to completely miss the point of this video, which is to hopefully stop this cycle of hatred from swinging from one end of the extreme to the other. And just as importantly, this response would fall short of my own ideal of truth and empathy. Because while I not only feel it important, but also absolutely necessary to call out and address what I believe to be the truth of this phenomenon, I must also stress the importance and the necessity of asking ourselves why this is happening. Or in other words, to try to empathize with those who promote this misandry. Why do certain contingencies of women have so much enmity for all men, when most men never have done and never would do anything to harm them? And while that question deserves its own video, I will say here that I do not believe that it is without legitimate reason that these factions of women believe that their approach is justified. Contrary to some of the assertions that are being made by certain scholars and ideological groups, I don't believe that it is even a question that throughout history and across cultures, women have been marginalized, discriminated against, and treated as second-class citizens. Based off of the information that we have today, I believe this to be the undeniable truth. And while I personally refrain from aligning myself with any modern social justice campaign, I still maintain the belief that there is at least some truth and legitimacy in each of these movements. For example, Me Too was, in my opinion, a deeply flawed movement, but it unquestionably uncovered some truly horrific standards and practices that were being perpetuated in Hollywood. And while this monstrous system affected both men and women, it was undoubtedly women who had to bear the brunt of this dehumanizing environment. And threats of sexual impropriety notwithstanding, women have been used as bargaining chips, have been denied rights that were supposedly enshrined for all citizens, and have been consistently overlooked for certain roles within society, specifically leadership roles. And so I think that it is entirely fair to say that, generally speaking, women have been marginalized and discriminated against for no other reason than the fact that they were women. And while I think that these generational feelings of anger and resentment are in many ways justified, I still feel it necessary to point to the undeniable reality that the current manifestation of this anger and resentment is doing much more harm for our societies than good, and that although understandable, the current expression of this anger is closer in classification to revenge, not justice. Revenge does not discriminate between the innocent and the guilty, and inflicts upon the innocent the very wounds that these previously marginalized groups have suffered so greatly from. And unless those groups now seek to give the innocent the justifiable anger necessary to exact revenge upon them, then the onus is on those groups to break this cycle of hatred by prioritizing justice over revenge. Because justice would see to it that no group, man, woman, black, white, gay, straight, and everyone in between, is vilified, marginalized, or discriminated against within our society. I've said this before in regards to race relations between black and white people, but using the tools of those that once oppressed you against the people that you oppose today only proves that you are no better than them. Because now that you have this power at your mercy, instead of destroying this tool that caused you so much harm, you take it and use it for yourself, which only confirms that if the roles were reversed back then, you would have committed the same atrocities against them that they committed against you. But in any case, I think that's going to be it for this one. If you made it this far, thank you so much for indulging me. I truly hope this all made sense, but of course, if it didn't, please feel free to let me know why so that I can try to address any misconceptions in the comments. But with that said, I wish you all the very best going forward. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Peace, and be easy.